was a dead man.
Stop this madness in the name of your king!
The Iron Throne. Seriously, who would have thought a chair made of melted swords could cause so much chaos in Westeros? There are plenty of thrones in George R.R. Martin's world, but nothing comes close to the Iron Throne. It's the seat of the ruler, the king of the Andals, Rhoynar and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the realm. And that makes the throne the ultimate symbol of power. Interestingly, the story of the Iron Throne doesn't stop at being the high seat. In fact, if anything, it seems to have the power of the person who claims it. You know how it feels alive at times by implying total power to the one who sits on it? But how? Well, that's exactly what we're breaking down today. We're taking the Iron Throne apart, piece by piece, to see whether it's simply a symbol of power or something far more mysterious. How was the Iron Throne made? The Iron Throne was born only after Aegon the Conqueror, or the first ever Aegon in the Targaryen dynasty, proclaimed him the king and was crowned by the High Septon of Oldtown. After Aegon successfully conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms in Westeros, he ordered for a throne to be made from the swords of his fallen enemies. Legend says that the Iron Throne has almost 1,000 blades, which were heated by Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread. Blacksmiths then hammered the components, and it took them about 59 days to make the throne. Martin stated in multiple interviews that the Iron Throne in the book was huge, and it towered over the room like a great beast. He even stated that the throne actually looked ugly because it was asymmetrically put together by blacksmiths instead of craftsmen. The ruler had to walk up iron steps to sit on the throne, and the ruler sat some 10 feet above everyone else. It made him look like he was sitting on a raised position and looking down on his court. However, what we've seen in the shows is a watered-down version of the book throne because making something that sprawled from the ground wasn't feasible for a set. And wrote in his blog, "The HBO throne has become iconic, and well it might. It's a terrific design, and it served the show very well. There are replicas and paperweights of it in 3 different sizes. Everyone knows it. I love it. I have all those replicas right here sitting on my shelves." For a quick comparison, this is how the throne looks in the book versus in the show. But the throne for House of the Dragon looks evidently bigger and more expensive than the one we saw in Game of Thrones, and is slightly closer to Martin's vision. How did the Iron Throne treat its first ruler? See, Aegon intentionally built the throne to be sharp and uncomfortable in order to keep rulers always on their toes. It's a throne that will not offer luxury. Rather, one wrong move, and a cut will remind you of the value of the seat you're sitting on. Aegon the Conqueror, too, was cut by the Iron Throne, and according to a passage in Fire and Blood, King Aegon read Prince Nymore's words in open court, stone-faced and silent, whilst seated on the Iron Throne. When he rose afterward, men said his hand was dripping blood. He burned the letter and never spoke of it again. In a way, it shows that the Iron Throne always worked as a reminder as to when to stop yourself, be it during immersing in joy or anger. It was like a living timer, and when Aegon was furious, the bleeding wound was a sign for him to stop and get his wits about himself. And then he mounted Balerion, flew to Dragonstone, and returned the next morning to sign a lasting peace treaty. Yes, Aegon was cut, but he was not an incapable ruler. The Iron Throne injured him more as a hit to come back to reality and encouraged the king to do what was needed rather than drowning in rage and taking hasty decisions. Did the Iron Throne lead to the creation of King's Landing? When Aegon the Conqueror first arrived in Westeros, he made a wooden castle, the Aegon Fort, which was located in the region where he first arrived on the shore at the mouth of Blackwater Rush. And at first, the Iron Throne was kept in that wooden castle, atop Aegon's high hill. But back then, there was no King's Landing or Red Keep. Yet, almost immediately after Aegon kept the throne there and claimed himself to be the king, soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, blacksmiths, and small folk began gathering around the new seat of power. While some came seeking the king's protection, others saw an opportunity to profit from the growing royal court. And soon, a temporary military camp gradually turned into permanent streets and markets, spreading from Aegon's High Hill to Visenya's Hill and Rhaenyra's Hill. Once the settlement expanded, Aegon I began planning a permanent royal castle, a project later completed by Maegor I with the construction of the Red Keep on the very site where the Aegon fort once stood. So if you look at it, King's Landing was not built first and then given a throne. Rather, the throne came first, and the city grew around it. And once again, it forces you to think whether the Iron Throne had some powers that drew people and power towards itself. Did the Iron Throne accept Maegor I as Aegon the Conqueror's successor? Maegor I Targaryen, the son of King Aegon I Targaryen and his elder sister wife, Queen Visenya, seized the Iron Throne in the first major usurpation of its history. Ideally, the throne should have passed down to Prince Aegon, his older brother Aerys I's eldest son, and that didn't end well. Maegor had shown a cruel side since childhood. He was quarrelsome and preferred fire and steel to resolve issues rather than discussion. So naturally, as a ruler, Maegor was extremely harsh. He killed his nephew, slaughtered the builders of the Red Keep to keep its secret tunnels hidden, launched a merciless campaign against the Faith of the Seven, and took multiple wives by force. That soon earned him the nickname of Maegor the Cruel. Now, when we go by the idea that the Iron Throne has the ability to accept or reject a ruler, Maegor's example is of utmost importance. See, Maegor's death remains one of the biggest mysteries in Martin's work. Yes, the king had made endless enemies, and it's possible that he was murdered by someone, but then again, finding his body soaked in blood on the Iron Throne, with several cuts on his arms and a sword spike through the back of his neck, does suggest something. No, I'm not saying the Iron Throne became a moving monster at night and killed Maegor, but the fact that he died inexplicably on the very throne he pined for does indicate that the throne almost seems to relish the death of those who are evil and unfit to rule. Did the Iron Throne make Aerys II Targaryen paranoid? Now let's look at Aerys II Targaryen, or the Mad King. Yes, I know Viserys should have come first, but I'm saving him and Rhaenyra for later. As far as Aerys II was concerned, I'm not saying that the Iron Throne in particular drove him to insanity. Aerys' descent into madness had various reasons, and the defiance of Duskendale was one of the major reasons. But the throne certainly didn't help, because throughout his reign, Aerys constantly cut himself on the jagged blades of the Iron Throne. It left his hands, arms, and legs covered in half-healed wounds and scabs, and the injuries became so frequent that people mockingly called him King Scab. In Westeros, many believed that it was a sign of the Iron Throne rejecting its king and considering him to be cruel and unworthy. The repeated cuts only increased Aerys' paranoia, and he became terrified of sharp objects, refusing to let anyone trim his hair or even his long fingernails. Slowly, his appearance grew more haggard, and his mind became more unstable, and the throne quietly sat there as a constant reminder that it had never truly accepted him. Whether you want to read between the lines remains open to interpretation. Is it possible that the Iron Throne carried the echoes of the dead? Okay, this is where I'm going to give the theory wheel a strong turn. See, in the books, there is no confirmation whatsoever that the Iron Throne was haunted or that it contains the spirits of the warriors whose swords forged it. But Martin has repeatedly shown us that in his world, death is not an absolute ending, and neither does it always mean the end of a person's influence. For instance, the weirwood trees. They were sentient, and through them, the old gods were known to preserve memories that spanned centuries. Then we had the skin changers, who could leave a part of themselves behind after death and lived on inside their bonded animals. Even Beric Dondarrion lost pieces of his memories every time he was resurrected, while Lady Stoneheart returned as a twisted remnant of Catelyn Stark. The point is, over and over again, Martin established that people and places could retain echoes of what came before. Now, let's add the idea of blood and sacrifice, because magic was an essential element in his stories. We've seen Melisandre seeing the future through flames, or Daenerys' dragons hatching without any proper explanation. Let's go back to the Iron Throne. It was forged from the surrendered swords of defeated kings, lords, knights, and warriors, which means they were more than weapons. They had been used in multiple battles, and many of their owners had died with those very blades in hand. Ideally, that makes the throne something which has been built upon generations of bloodshed. Lastly, if we add the fact that it was created using dragon flame, we can theorize that the swords were no regular pieces of steel. Sure, there might be no literal ghosts trapped inside them, but they were able to carry the silent pain of the defeated. And Martin did write about places that absorb history, like Harrenhal or the Isle of Faces. What if he had something similar in mind for the throne? Food for thought, huh? Ned Stark thought to himself the Iron Throne was full of traps for the unwary. A chair that could kill a man, and had, if the stories could be believed. How does House of the Dragons Viserys I repeat the same blades? Also, Viserys was not a malicious king, unlike Maegor I or Aerys II Targaryen in the latter years of his reign. Bloodshed and violence, but he was weak and indecisive. So much so that he got manipulated by his hand and basically planted the very seeds that would lead to a massive civil war between two sections of the Targaryens. Viserys' governance was also unfit, and he was easily swayed, lacking the authority and legitimacy that a king required to rightfully sit on the throne. And just like how the Iron Throne did not comply with cruel rulers, it could also not allow unworthy successors to own it. That kind of explains why the throne seemed to hurt him so much that his wounds never really healed, and eventually he died. Viserys' death was indeed from old age, but the cuts seem to have preponed it by causing infections and diseases. Is the Iron Throne rejecting Rhaenyra? Well, if we take the pattern in consideration, then yes. Rhaenyra Targaryen went to extreme measures to get the throne which was rightfully hers, yes, but for that, she lost two of her sons, a loyal supporter, Prince Rhaenys, and her dragon, and once she sat on it, it felt like an end. Rhaenyra's entire life was about this battle of claiming the throne, but now that it had been done, it slyly marked the end of her beginning. In the episode Queen's Landing, we saw her slicing Otto Hightower's head and moving toward the throne with bloody footsteps. It was a gentle representation of how much bloodshed, even if unintentionally, Rhaenyra has caused to own what was promised to her. And now she's finding herself surrounded by endless problems, trying to hold on to the throne for support, for a reminder that this piece of chair was what made her lose so much in life. In Inside the Episode, executive producer Lonnie Peristeer said, "One of the greatest scenes in the series is the moment that Rhaenyra cuts her finger on the Iron Throne. We all know what that means. There's infections that follow. There's rot that follows. It basically reveals what's ultimately happening for real in Rhaenyra's tenure as queen. There's obviously some significant foreshadowing in this moment, though I don't know to what extent Rhaenyra is cognizant of its significance. Viserys kept his own condition very private. I don't know how she could know that the throne was the root of her illness. I think Rhaenyra perceives it as part of a kind of broader hostility. That makes it clear that the throne is definitely not accepting Rhaenyra, and she is not yet fully aware of the consequences of those minor cuts because she believes that her reign is preordained. But why is the throne rejecting her? It seems that ever since Rhaenyra lost Jace and became obsessed about being the queen, she has lost some sparks of humanity and is changing. She's no longer the same person who once wished to rule the realm peacefully, but with each passing day, she seems to be following in the footsteps of Targaryen madness. And greed for power is not something the Iron Throne loves. That's exactly why Viserys reiterated that Aegon the Conqueror annexed the kingdoms not only out of ambition, but because of a dark prophecy. Why did Drogon choose to destroy the throne instead of anything else in the finale? In the Game of Thrones finale, after Jon stabbed Daenerys, her dragon Drogon could have killed Jon Snow. And by logic, he should have. But no. Drogon chose to burn the Iron Throne, which on one hand marked a full circle moment. A throne being forged by dragon flame, getting destroyed by the same power. But on the other hand, it hinted that the Iron Throne was the major catalyst of all troubles. You can look at it as something which has an invisible hold over people and their minds, as if calling out to them. And in the middle of all the chaos that ensued, to get the throne was almost like a test devised by it. It checked how far one can go to fulfill their ambitions, and if one lost their own identity and sanity in the process, the throne wasn't likely to accept the ruler. In a way, we can look at the throne as this machinery created by Aegon the Conqueror to judge the purity and worth of his successors who can claim themselves to be genuine rulers and protectors of the Seven Kingdoms. But how did Drogon understand all of this? See, Martin has established that dragons are extremely intelligent and form a bond with their riders. Thus, when Daenerys started to change, Drogon sensed it and realized the true enemy was not Jon, it was the hunger for the throne that corrupted his rider. Can the throne decide the fate of the rulers? Yeah, I'm going down the path of speculation once again, because after all these discussions, I'm kind of inclined to believe that the Iron Throne might be sentient. Now, I have two examples that might justify the idea that the throne could seal fates, or in a way, hint at a ruler's future. First up, we have Aegon II Targaryen, who was crowned king, but was seen as the usurper by Rhaenyra and her loyalists. We saw Aegon slouching on the throne while listening to the petitions of the commoners. As I mentioned before, the throne was absolutely not meant for that, no comfort or luxury. It was intentionally uncomfortable to sit on, so the ruler would always remain vigilant. But Aegon's body language showed his reluctance when it came to matters of governance, choosing relaxation over duty. In fact, he even sat on the throne with feet above it and drank wine. A few episodes, and for a very long time, he was confined to his bed. It was almost as if the throne punished him for not taking his responsibilities seriously, leaving him in a crippled state where he could do nothing but rest. Next up, we have Joffrey Baratheon, who got agitated during a chaotic court session after the Battle of the Blackwater. When a prisoner loudly called him a false king and an illegitimate heir, he lashed out, cut his hand on the sharp metal blades of the Iron Throne, and cried out in pain for his mother. Now, let's consider how Joffrey died. He was poisoned after his drink was spiked with a fatal substance called the Strangler during his wedding feast. Much like the chaotic scene in court, his final moments unfolded in front of a large crowd. He died in agony, and once again, his mother came running. But this time, there was nothing she could do. Could the throne's judgment just be coincidence, not magic? Aegon the Conqueror cut himself while gripping onto the throne in anger. Viserys when he was growing old and couldn't sit upright, and Aerys became erratic, which might have affected his body movements. In fact, Robert Baratheon called the throne that damnable and monstrous uncomfortable chair, and didn't seem to have any superstitions or mystical respect about it. And about the throne wounding unworthy rulers, Robert stated, "Nonsense. It's a chair made of steel blades. Rhaenyra had wanted it all her life and sacrificed 2 sons for it. She likely gripped the damn thing too tight." If you're wondering where this line came from, there was an animated featurette which was available on the 5th season's DVD release of Game of Thrones and features many characters voicing the events of the Dance of Dragons. I mean, he does have a point. It's possible that the throne, being the cumbersome seat it was, would cut anyone who was not careful enough, and in fact, the master who wrote about the events wasn't sure himself. But then again, given how Martin's universe is fraught with magic and spells, the idea that the Iron Throne might have a consciousness of its own makes things spicier. Alright guys, that's all for today. I know there are opposing views as to whether the Iron Throne is sentient, but as I said, personally, I'm going to say yes. But I do understand the logical points for the throne just being a hazardous chair, and if you have any more theories on it, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Also, if you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.